Good morning. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar, Develop Your Fairy Ring Control Plan, presented by PBI-Gordon and taught by Mike Fidanza, Ph.D. My name is Lisa Wick. I'm Senior Manager of E-Learning Programs here at GCSAA and will be today's moderator. A couple of quick housekeeping notes before I turn things over to Mike. We are recording today's event. You'll receive access to that recording as part of a follow-up email. Your audio is muted in this system, but we encourage you to ask questions as we go along. You can use the raise hand button that you see on your GoToWebinar control panel tab and raise your hand. I can unmute you at an appropriate time. You can also type a question in the question answer box. If your control panel has minimized and you just see that narrow tab, click on the orange rectangle at the top and that will maximize the control panel and you'll have access then to be able to type in questions. You'll also have access to a couple handouts that we have in there that you can download. Today's webinar is eligible for external education points, and at the end of the program, we'll give you a code that you can use on the association's website. We hope you find today's webinar valuable. It's brought to us in partnership with PBI-Gordon. With a full line of herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, growth regulators, and other products, PBI-Gordon Corporation is a national leader in the professional turf and ornamental management industry. We thank them for their partnership. Mike Fidanza is a professor of plant and soil sciences at Pennsylvania State University Berks Campus, where he holds a research and teaching appointment. He earned both his bachelor's and master's at Penn State and his Ph.D. at the University of Maryland. Fidanza's research focus is turfgrass ecology, the translational exploration and evaluation of plant health products, and the biology and ecology of fairy ring disease in turfgrass. He has established the Valentine East Research and Teaching Facility at Penn State Berks Campus and teaches both graduate and undergraduate courses. Fidanza has received numerous awards, including the Outstanding Research Award for Penn State Berks Campus. He has taught both seminars and webinars for GCSAA. Please join me in welcoming today's presenter, Mike Fidanza, Ph.D. Take it away, Mike.
Okay, Lisa, thank you. Thank you for all your help with these webinars. And I'm sorry you had to read all that intro. Who wants to hear all that about me? I'm going to turn off my camera. Nobody wants to see me, but I could always turn it back on later. And let's see. Well, hang on a second here. Let's see. Okay, let's get right to this fairy ring control program, or developing your fairy ring control plan. Great title. Thank you, PBI-Gordon, for sponsoring it. Thank you, GCSAA. Let's see. There's my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me anytime, and I'll share that again later on. Okay, first, this showed up around Thanksgiving time, and yeah, I want to echo the sentiment on this tweet. Thank you to all golf course industry folks, superintendents, assistants, everybody in the industry. Thank you for all your hard work. What a challenging year 2021 has been, and looks like 2022 is going to be challenging as well, but that's okay. That's what you folks do. You take on these challenges. I love this. This was great. I have 2 dogs at home myself, and this might be the answer to our labor shortage. Maybe we can train these dogs to work with, of course. I don't know. My 2 dogs, all they want to do is eat and sleep all day, but I love this photo. That's why I wanted to share that with you. A couple of things. I had the chance to visit Italy this year, to visit some cousins ago. I have to go check in with La Familia on occasion. I'm very fortunate to have cousins over there. And I visited the Assisi, Italy, and the Umbria region, just a beautiful region in central Italy. Visited the Basilica there, St. Francis, and I was there to talk to the Franciscan brothers about the lawn. I was trying to save their lawn. They were trying to save my soul. I'm not going to tell you which one was more successful, but beautiful. If you ever get to Italy, visit Umbria. Very moving experience there. South of Rome, there's the Sicily-Rome American Military Cemetery. Had a chance to visit there. Behind me, there's 8,000 American soldiers laid to rest There's another 3,000 listed as missing in action. This was the World War II campaign in Sicily and southern Italy. 11,000 listed altogether there, but any problems that you might have or any problems or stress that I thought I had is nothing compared to those young men that gave their life. And of course, walking around the facility, I stumbled upon a fairy ring on their zoysia grass lawn there. So of course I had to find the fairy ring, but just a very peaceful, beautiful facility there, well maintained. And again, if you ever find yourself in Rome, take a little road trip, just 30-minute drive south and visit that site. Then I got to visit the Marco Simone Golf Club there in Rome. They're having the Ryder Cup in 2023, and I graciously volunteered to make the cappuccino. So we'll see if I'm allowed to go in 2023. Some folks sent me some pictures over. Stan Koska sent me this. I love to find out where this is, and I asked my wife if we can retire here, and she said absolutely not, but I think the appropriate fairy ring house for somebody like me. Somebody sent me this magic mushroom air freshener. And I should have patented this, and maybe I could sell it on the side as fairy ring air fresheners. Dr. Alan Wyndham, great colleague there at University of Tennessee. Remember, him and Henry Wetzel, Dr. Henry Wetzel, they used to have the turfgrass disease microscope workshop at the GCSAA conference, which is always well attended. He sent this picture. Really, is a great photographer, and what it depicts is you can't see in this photo very well, but you see all the spores are releasing, and the point here is these fairy ring fungi, they produce these mushrooms, toadstool-like mushrooms, and it can produce all kinds of spores. I'm talking about millions of spores are released, and for the most part, they're just ubiquitous. They don't do anything, but just can they're sort of go through a phase, and sometime down the road, that one little spore will sort of sprout into a mycelial mass and become a fairy ring. It's just amazing. World of fungi. Again, fairy ring has been studied in ecology for years, and it's just part of nature. The basidiomycete fungi, the mycelial mass, the vegetative part of that organism is growing and thriving in the environment, and under certain environmental conditions, it has to go through a reproductive phase, and hence the production of these mushrooms or fruiting bodies. Pat Jones, a buddy of ours of the industry, right? He's always posting on Frisky Fairy Ring Friday. We always appreciate Pat's posts as he walked there in Cleveland, and he always comes across various mushrooms. And the point I want to make with this photo is these fairy ring fungi, again, they're basidiomycetes, and they like to live in or thrive on organic matter, specifically lignin. So you find them in woods and mulch beds, but you obviously find them in our turfgrass systems because our organic matter is rich in lignin content. We'll talk about that a little later. Well, let's talk about it now. Trees. Tree roots can compete with turf, right? And these are posts about the tree roots, that is, and how the turf can thrive. And a lot of times you'll find fairy ring associated with trees or trees that have removed the stumps. But don't forget, there's a lot of the tree component under the ground. And what is that? That's wood, or composed mostly of lignin. And these fairy ring fungi, they really like that. They like the lignin component. And so oftentimes you'll hear stories of, hey, we removed the tree, and then the next year all these fairy ring mushrooms popped up. That's because it's this ecology in action. The fairy ring fungi are trying to decompose all that lignin. Okay. Dr. Larry Stoll of Pace Turf sent this tweet about fairy ring colonizing construction material under artificial turf specifically, and it was the dog turd fungus, sort of a cousin of the fairy ring, growing underneath the artificial turf, causing it to bulge, and specifically, with these basidiomycetes or farrowing fungi, you look for the clamp connections, the specific, under the microscope, you look at the mycelial strand or hyphal strand, and you'll see these clamp connections that tells you it's a basidiomycete or a farrowing fungus. There, that's a close-up of a clamp connection. For those of you who are into this, into looking at the microscope, you look for these little clamp connections. There you go. Don't forget, now I just want to share this with you. Not every patch you see or every blighted circular patch is fairy ring. It could be large patch of zoysia, and this is not fairy ring. And then the mycelial, the hyphal strands are right angle branching, no clamp connections. So that's a Rhizoctonia. This comes from our buddy Dr. Derek Settle. There you go, right angle branching of this strand. Don't confuse brown patch with gray leaf spot on tall fescue. And the reason why I'm sharing this, you'll seldom see or never really see any leaf lesions of farrowing sites unless there's another disease attacking it. Farrowing does not reveal itself in terms of leaf lesions or any spots or blotches on leaves. But if you're dealing with tall fescue, and kind of pay attention to brown patch versus gray leaf spot on tall fescue, we're seeing more and more gray leaf spot on tall fescue, unfortunately, from the south creeping up the Mid-Atlantic region. And then Dr. Frank Wong posted this gray leaf spot on crabgrass. Yes, plant pathologists are weird, Pat Jones stated, but again, it's all part of what we do. Dr. Nardi posted this mycelium. This is, again, for a plant pathologist, turf pathologist nerd, this is great. But you'll seldom see farrowing mycelium on the leaf, in the canopy itself. You can see the mycelium there in the thatch layer or the upper root zone. But if you see mycelium fluffing out like that on the canopy, it could be dollar spot, it could be pythium, it could be brown patch. And then again, brown patch or Rhizoctonia blade has this right angle branching. Let's see. So let's get back to farrowing. You see a site that's blighted or circular patch or an area that could be you suspect it could be farrowing. Pool core. If it has a strong mushroom-like odor, these basidiomycetes, as they colonize the thatch and organic matter, oftentimes you'll have this mushroom-like odor. You might look funny smelling those soil cores holding up to your nose, but telltale sign, strong mushroom odor. A little history. I like the historical of what we do in turf. Farrowing may have been one of the first turfgrass diseases ever recorded or published or reported. This goes back to 1563, and I'm trying to find the actual reference on this from England. And this is in 1884. This was published in Nature. There was an article on fairy rings, and if you're reading that, it's really could have been written. I like how they wrote back then. They prevail wherever the growth of the grass is inferior, especially on the poor downs of the chalk districts and on poor quality sandy soils where the natural herbage is wanting in vigor. That's really a colorful way to write scientifically, but it tells me that they were dealing with farrowing on sandy soils even 1984. I don't know if any other turf disease was ever published in Nature. Pardon me. Okay, let's talk about visual farrowing symptoms of turf. What's interesting about farrowing, there's about 60 species, right? 60 basidiomycete species that have been documented to cause farrowing symptoms in turf. There's probably about 10 or 12 basidiomycete species that we see more commonly than others, but be that as it may, every one of those basidiomycete species produces a very similar visual symptom when they affect turf in terms of farrowing. We have type 1 symptoms, type 2 and type 3. Type 1, rings or arcs or zones. Type 2, your green stimulated rings. and then type 3 are the mushrooms popping up. Now you can have these types, these visual types occurring by themselves or all together. The photo in the lower left shows that sort of an arc or semicircle of a necrotic zone, followed by some mushrooms popping up there as a kicker. Often what happens is, right, the basidiomycetes are vegetative mycelium is colonizing the soil, colonizing the thatch, and it's breaking down that organic matter, releasing ammonium is converted to nitrate. Nitrate's taken up as sort of a free fertilizer, if you will. What will happen is oftentimes if you get excessive amounts of ammonium released, that the site can become very hydrophobic or water repellent. The bacteria is not there to convert the ammonium to nitrate. You end up with roots from ammonium toxicity, and unfortunately you get these dead zones or dead rings. So type 1, type 2, type 3, these are our visual symptoms. We'll go through this in more detail, but historically how this came about, let's see, it started out, let's get back, hang on a second. Yeah, here it is. The Journal of Ag Research, published in 1917, over 100 years ago. It's hard to imagine. These two USDA scientists, Shantz and Meisel, they were in eastern Colorado, east of the Rockies there, on the pasture Colorado, where they were making observations on fairy ring currents among these pastures. And the work was actually done, I think, in 1914, 1915, eventually published in 1917, just prior to World War I, of course. Kind of, you got to think about this. Back then, they probably took the train out there to Colorado, spent the summer, probably lived in tents, lived in their tents, or who knows, as they were making observations of the soil and the vegetation and making notes. The articles, it's about over 50 pages, and it's detailed observations of these fairy rings occurring in these fields and pastures. They started to see a pattern of either dead necrotic zones or lush, stimulated grasses, mushrooms pop. So they eventually, revealed a pattern of the type 1, type 2, and type 3 symptoms. And this is a classic example of the cross section that was published in that article, showing the vegetative mycelium, and you have the dead zone, and we know it was related to hydrophobic or water repellent zone, which also high levels of ammonium building up there. You often see, the stimulated zone of the fairy ring because of the nitrate being released, that kind of thing. So the type 1, type 2, type 3, Shantz and Meisel, first described it back then over 100 years ago, and it still holds true today. Now Homer Shantz, he went on to become president of University of Arizona. So I think we can brag and say that perhaps studying fairy ring helped train him to become the president of the university. Maybe there's hope for me. It kind of looks like he was angry. Maybe I'm going to look like this after years of studying fairy ring. But and then Meisel, he was a plant physiologist with the USDA. He went on to work in the Pacific Northwest in pasture lands and published a great deal. I don't have a picture of Meisel, but I did find his grave site. Anyway, I hope I don't look like Homer Shantz when I get older, but you never know. And then Adam Miller of the USDA sent me this photo a while back, and I think this reflects great. This is a nice, really ties in with the image from 1917, showing the stimulated inner zone, that outer necrotic zone. This is often what we see in fairy ring and turf. All right, a couple of pictures here. Frisky Fairy Ring Friday pictures, mushrooms popping up on the roadside. Darren Davis, Penn State alum. I always like his pictures from Old Florida Golf Club. Now, when you see these mushrooms popping up, okay, a lot of times you can mow these off, and it's not a big deal, but it also indicates something's happening there, obviously. The fairy ring, the basidiomycetes growing out radially in a circle. And so you might want to just keep an eye on this site. There could be an awful lot of vegetative mycelium in the thatch, and going into a heat and drought stress time in the summer, that outer perimeter sort of outline might become high. I'd start to see dead necrotic turf showing up. So, at first it's kind of a neat little thing. Okay, you got mushrooms popping up, but pay attention to that and keep an eye on things. And then people still ask me, can you eat these mushrooms? And I say, every mushroom is edible at least once, but don't take a chance. Go to the grocery store, buy mushrooms, cook with them, but leave the ones in the wild be. Okay. I like this beautiful photo of mushrooms growing in a circle. Darren Davis also did another one here. And this illustrates that the mycelium, again, breaking down that organic matter, releasing that nitrate. And often you get a question, well, can you apply fertilizer or iron to mask these symptoms? You certainly can. You just don't know how much soluble nitrogen or iron to apply that'll mask the symptoms. You start out work your way up. I mean, if you're trying to mask these dark green symptoms, it's going to take a while for that to dissipate. Let's see. Okay, the fairy ring. Dogs and fairy ring, they're always my favorite. Excellent. When you put dogs and fairy rings together, I don't know why that is. We have fairy rings from all over the world, and even lawns, and this one from, I believe it's from Thailand. Looks like aliens landed, and this is pretty severe. Unfortunately, you can see these rings showing up like this overnight. And what you have to do in this case, you have to punch holes, get air down into that root zone, try to vent that root zone. There's a lot of ammonium there. Applying a soil surfactant, drenching it in. A fungicide will stop the fungus in its tracks, but now you have to, what I call, go through a rescue program. You might have to dig that up and resod it or reseed it. Eventually that turf can, but it's not going to happen overnight. So let's get into some details here. What's the best fungicide to control fairy ring? What is the ultimate best fungicide? I get this question all the time. Let's see, where is the best? Ooh. Well, the best one, it's the one that works best at your site, and they all work better when used with cultural practices. How's that for skipping the actual question? There are so many fungicides available labeled for fairy ring now. Now, going back, I'm old now, so going back to the 90s, the very first fungicide labeled for fairy ring was ProStar. There may have been one or two fungicides labeled before that, I'm not sure, but ProStar was evaluated in the 90s. Excellent for rhizoctonia. The active ingredient in ProStar is flutalanyl. Flutalanyl is, again, an excellent active ingredient against the rhizoctonia. It's also very effective against fairy ring. So it was one of the first fungicides labeled for fairy ring. Since then, we have many, many more. And all the fungicides labeled for fairy ring, they do work for fairy ring, or else they wouldn't have fairy ring on their label. But all these fungicides, in my experience, work better in tandem with good cultural practices. Okay. Now, this is a great publication, Chemical Control of Turf Diseases. Comes out, I think, every 2 years now. Lists all the turf diseases and all the fungicides labeled for the turf diseases. So take a look at this. We're going to dive into this a little bit. The fairy ring complex, okay. Again, they recommend, and I agree with this, type 2 fairy ring sites, dark green rings, you can apply some nitrogen and iron to sort of mask the symptoms. How much nitrogen, how much iron, it just depends. Aerification and top dressing. Well, we'll get into this. The organic matter management part is very important for managing fairy ring sites, especially sites with chronic fairy ring problems. You have these sites here that show up like this. You get some dark green rings showing up, and a lot of times they'll dissipate. Okay, the nitrogen is the turf is going to take up the nitrogen. You're going to mow it off. A lot of times they'll sort of dissipate, but sometimes those dark green rings could go hydrophobic, and then you end up with these, these dead rings, and that's not good. You can apply a light application of iron or iron or nitrogen to kind of mask the symptoms. But again, it's a case varying. Unfortunately, it's a case by case basis. Every varying site is unique and different. Unfortunately, makes it very difficult. This is not difficult to ascertain when you have thick thatch layers like this and thatchy sites and thick layers of organic matter. Varying fungi love this. Okay, there's no fungicide or soil surfactant that's going to correct this. This takes some intervention, some mechanical intervention. There's an awful lot of lignin here in this zone that the varying fungi are going to like. Okay, it's like going to Mama Fidanza's house on a Sunday when she's making homemade spaghetti and meatballs. I just can't have one plate. I got to have 3, which reminds me, she's supposed to make me pasta vajol this week. So I got to give her a call when I'm done here. What you can do, like, sure, if it's varying, probably sure you see the symptoms. You can pull a cord and place it in a plastic baggie with a wet paper towel overnight. And a lot of times you'll see the mycelium will sort of fluff out at the thatch layer. Again, it has a strong mushroom smell. What this tells me and tells you, you want to punch holes solid time right through this layer, sort of physical disruption. If you're going to apply a fungicide and a wetting agent, you want to water it in down to this layer. Okay, Dr. Wetzel there, Pacific Northwest, he does a great job out. And again, this will tell you, how. The question I get is, if you're going to water in a fungicide, water in a wetting agent, how much water? Well, you just need enough water to get through this layer. However much water that is, that's what you got to do. Okay? Could be a 1/4 inch, could be 3/4 inch, could be more. Colleague of mine in Central PA, great golf course, Kentucky Bluegrass Roughs. This is where I varying trials. Why? Because varying shows up here every summer during heat and drought stress. Why? Because there's thick organic layer, a lot of thatch there, in a position to core cultivate or airify the Kentucky Bluegrass Roughs, and which is fine. And a lot of times they'll get these dark green rings showing up. Sometimes they'll just fade away and no problem. Other times, if it's prolonged heat and drought stress, they get hydrophobic and turn into type 1 symptoms. So again, if he were going to go after this culturally, start by reducing that thatch layer. Sand top dressing, very important. You guys know how to manage organic matter and deal with that. This is a colleague, Damon DeGiorgio, down in the Caribbean, using the grade on seashore paspalum. Punching holes, this is one of the things to do in sites. Introduce some oxygen. Try to restore that air-water balance in that root zone. Dr. Rock there in Nebraska wrote this article there in GCM about punching a hole versus pulling a core. With varying sites, again, you don't want to pull cores in the middle of the summer, but punching holes can really, really help. And it helps with recovery too. Punching some holes, a little sand top dressing if you can, soil surfactant, water it in. You're trying to help that turf recover. Okay. Again, this was from a tweet there, punching holes, and you can get recovery pretty quickly with very narrow diameter tines. Okay. Oh, drainage. No fungicide or soil surfactant will correct drainage. Okay. Poorly drained sites, and sometimes you just have to implement some drainage improvement program there, strategies. Fortunately or unfortunately, that's how it goes. You can use soil surfactants and those kinds of products for certain things, but poorly drained sites can really be a challenge, as you know, for many reasons. And again, you want to get a good air-water balance in that root zone. Let's see. Okay, aerification. Again, you see varying sites. Sometimes you can get away with just punching holes and applying a soil surfactant to help that turf recover. Sometimes you better put a fungicide in there with it to knock that fungicide back and keep it from wreaking havoc in the near future. So one thing about managing varying sites, we like to tie it in with soil surfactants or wetting agents. You see these sites there of droughty water stress or drought symptoms in turf, lawns, landscapes, greens, fairways, etc. You pull a soil core and it's sort of powder dry. So why doesn't water move uniformly in that soil root zone? There's a lot of reasons: soil chemical properties, soil physical properties, soil biological. One of the first studies on this goes back to the 90s of Dr. Decker in the Netherlands. He had passed away later, but he looked at he used a device. This was prior to the Spectrum TDR probe, and he observed sort of localized dry spots in a turf area on a golf course in the Netherlands, and he matched up the localized dry spots with the low soil moisture, correlated very, very well. Spots with low soil volumetric water content, low soil moisture, had the dry spots, the dry patches. So correlated very, very well with that. But in reality, water does not move uniformly through a soil profile because, again, we have plant material, we have turf grass, we have thatch, we have root, we have soil chemical properties, biological properties, physical properties. We have bacteria. We have bacteria that produce biofilms. Roots exude mucilage and various roots exudates. All influences how water is going to move through that root zone. So it's more of a preferential flow than anything else. This work was shown at Cornell University a few years back. So you have this, this sort of non-uniform wetting patterns in our turf soils. Unfortunately, sometimes we have sites that are just that won't infiltrate very well. So you have surface runoff, and which you're making applications of pesticides and fertilizers, and you don't want running off site, obviously. Let's see. Yeah, this was revealing burying underneath. And again, this was well, the fairing showed up in the surface, and then what this tells me is as you peel back the layers, you got a mycelial mat and vegetative mycelium underneath the root zone.
Hey, Mike, I have a question on
soil
that.
water repellents. Yes, go ahead.
Do you think that the fairy ring came in on the sod?
Oh, I've seen that happen. And again, on a couple of sites, I've had experience with sod that's come in, and there might be some soil attached to the sod, a half inch or inch, whatever. Let's say there, the Bacillium mycete was right there in the thatch in that upper root zone, and yes, it was definitely transported in with the sod. And it's not to blame the sod grower; they may not have seen it. They harvested it, right? They may not have. Obviously, it didn't manifest itself until it was in place. Environmental conditions. Unfortunately, I don't think there's a way to test the sod for fairing, like give it a.
That was going to be my next question. Is there anything you can do about that, preventatively when you're laying sod? It doesn't seem like you really
that's a good question, Lisa. I mean, you could if you knew that you're planting, you're placing sod that has some fairing active there. You could make a fungicide application. Certainly could make a fungicide soil surfactant tank mix application and water it in, and that would shut down that fungus for sure. All good question.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Yep. Or soil hydrophobicity, it's a biological origin. Again, think about the soil biology, the root zone. The roots are exuding compounds that can become water repellent over time, and it has such an impact on it. But you folks deal with this all the time. And the water repellent materials, it comes from surface waxes of our leaves and turfgrass leaves and the lignin and the stems and decomposing organic matter. It's all part of nutrient cycling, and it's very important to growing turf. But it can also, under certain conditions, become hydrophobic. The root exudates, roots expel these exudates or the mucilage. If the root zone is too dry, the mucilage is used to scavenge some water. If it's too wet, the mucilage is used to expel water from the root zone. It's a give and take that happens. And at the end of the day, you get all these organic coatings on soil particles that can become water repellent. This is a publication from 2020, and we tried to sort of identify areas in that turf profile that contributes to water repellent materials. And again, what we want is particles, as shown on the right, that are wettable. We get particles on the left, sort of organic, weird little waxy coating or something on a soil particle that can become hydrophobic. And farrowing fungi, they contribute to these sort of coatings on these particles. So this was a farrowing site from a while back, pull a soil core, and what you'll see, you do a water drop penetration test. You put some water droplets along the core there, and you'll see the water droplets just sitting here. This is sort of the hydrophobic zone. These droplets infiltrate it right away, so that's wettable. So this tells me that if we're going to make a fungicide application and a wetting agent application, we got to really water it in and get it down to this upper zone here. Okay. So I get this question a lot too about how soil surfactants behave in soils or how they work. This is a typical block copolymer soil surfactant. Most soil surfactants, the majority of soil surfactants, I guess, available, commercially available, are these block copolymer types, and they're basically sort of two components, or like a little, sort of like a sandwich here. You have your ethylene oxide part. The middle part is propylene oxide. The other part is ethylene oxide. EO, PO, EO chain. The ethylene oxide, they're hydrophilic, meaning they love water. The middle part, the propylene oxide, is hydrophobic. It doesn't like water. However, this hydrophobic part sticks to the hydrophobic of the soil particles, thus that particle water, thus making the particle wettable. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but you have a hydrophobic part of the wetting agent attaching itself to the hydrophobic soil, thus making the soil wettable. It's breaking the surface tension of water, but it's really making it wettable. Now, the question I get is, well, which one of these soil surfactants are penetrants? Which one are retainers? Which ones push water? Which ones hold water? And soil scientists hate really no way to test that to really know for sure. But I think it's a perception that we see in the field. Some of these wetting agents are very, very fast and wet hydrophobic soils very, very quickly. So maybe the perception is they're penetrants. And some wet soils, but slower, a slower time frame. They're slower at wetting soils, so maybe the perception is they're more retainer type. We're going to drill down this a little bit. There's a very talented and smart graduate student at the University of Arkansas looking into the structure-function relationship here, looking into these short chain and long chain components to see how that relates to water moving into the soil and water moving through the soil. Okay, that's the part we're missing with these soil surfactants. These EO and PO components of a block copolymer, they can be short lengths, longer lengths, and so stay tuned for that over the next couple of years. Looking forward to learning more about that. It may help us understand these soil surfactants a little more. This again, it gives you an example of a typical block copolymer and how it attaches itself to a hydrophobic soil particle, thus rendering it wettable, making it wettable. Again, I mentioned there's over 200 soil surfactants. This was in that 2020 article. Over 200 soil surfactants available in the United States. Over half of these are block copolymer types, very, very similar. Many are very similar, and there's only a few that may be proprietary. So we're trying to make sense of all this. What we're trying to do is develop a FRAC code system for soil surfactants. You know how we have the FRAC codes for fungicides. We're getting close. soil surfactants definitely improve overall, using soil surfactants and wetting agents in a program improves turf quality over time, increases the volumetric water content. What I want to share with you here is this is the untreated check. This is from our buddy Dr. Cale Bigelow. If you look at the untreated control, I believe this is on bent grass. May have been Green's Height, either Green's or I think it was Green's Height. But the point I want to make is the untreated, this is without a wetting agent. The volumetric water content was down 9–10%. You're living on the edge there. But adding a soil surfactant just gives you a little bit more hydration in the root zone, which increases the quality of turf. Anyway, also want to share with you with soil surfactants, they can improve nitrogen uptake. And then again, this management program, this is from our colleague, Dr. Dara Park there at Clemson. And this was published recently, I believe. She looked at these soil columns, very complicated project research. Coarse sand, sandy loam sand, and sandy clay loam, three different sands, three different soil root zones rather. Bermuda grass sod. Basically, she applied nitrogen with a radio labeled nitrogen, N15, to track nitrogen moving through that column. Okay, and the bottom line is this. Looking at two different experimental soil surfactants with just straight urea, sand, sandy loam, sandy clay loam, there was an increase in plant nitrogen uptake, an increase in soil nitrogen pools, and a decrease in nitrogen leaching. So in other words, using a soil surfactant facilitated better root uptake of nitrogen. Okay, and I think this, again, this helps with overall plant soil health, and I think this also helps with managing fairing affected sites. So the bottom line is soil surfactants can help in many, many different ways. Looking at the rhizosphere, so stay tuned for more of this as the years ahead. Again, are there plant and soil health options for managing fairing? I think if we, you have to think about this. The basidiomycetes, those fungi are in the soil, they're in the thatch. There's not much we can do about it really. As long as we have good air and water balance, typically everybody's going to be happy. When we get into those heat stress and drought stress times, then the fairing fungi kick in and cause some damage, and we'll share that with you in a moment. This is an article from a journal from 2020. There's a group of Italian scientists, and then I'm not related to any of these, looked at fairing fungi, and they called fairing fungi ecosystem engineers. I wish I would have thought of that. Basically, and this makes sense, the fungi are breaking down organic matter and basically trying to create an environment where the fungi can thrive and survive. That's all it's trying to do. It's to live its life, unfortunately, where we're trying to grow turf. Again, proper aeration, organic matter management combining with a wetting agent gives you that proper soil water balance, and perhaps this is our plant and soil health approach to managing fairing. So why do we see fairing? You guys know this. We get these wet, dry cycles. It can rain a couple of days, then it gets really dry, or it's dry, hot and dry, then it rains and it gets hot and dry again. These wet, dry cycles produce extreme volumetric water contents in the root zone. And using a wetting agent in a program hopefully gives us uniform moisture in the root zone and tries to avoid those extreme wet or extreme dry times. Okay, and oftentimes that's when we see fairing, low fertility, low nitrogen. Well, obviously we don't fertilize as much as we did back in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. Lower mowing heights, lower fertility. So we see these dark green rings show up more visually, more effectively under low nitrogen conditions, right? Heat stress, drought stress, soil stress, excessive thatch, excessive organic matter, all contribute to these fairing sites. Are we drying the soil too much? I think we do this a lot. We try to live on the edge, as one superintendent had told me. We want to manage moisture in the root zone. We don't want things too wet. We want a nice air-water balance. If we push things too far, that's when the fairing fungi can really kick in. They like some moisture in the root zone to be happy. If it gets too dry, they start to aggressively colonize the thatch and go into the reproductive phase to produce those mushrooms. And that's when things become really hydrophobic. And this is where a soil surfactant can help to kind of keep that moisture just enough for to maintain good quality turf and to keep the farrowing from going into the sort of the hydrophobic phase of its existence. I like this picture from the POGO monitoring soil moisture. We're using a POGO, TDR, Delta T, all these instruments work. But this one showed a farrowing affected zone, very low volumetric water content in the middle of that green, which was correlated well with the visual farrowing symptom. Okay. Again, looking at these fungicides, they're all labeled for farrowing. Again, your traditional one, your flutalonil, which is ProStar, but now it's Pedigree. We'll talk about that in a minute. Many others, the Heritage and the Fame, and I've tested all these, work very well, but they can also struggle if you don't have the cultural practices dialed in as well. And the question I get is, well, which one works best? I always compare everything to flutalonil because that was the older molecule and the one that's has the longest track record, I should say. But again, many of these fungicides work very well. You have to figure out which fungicide works best in your program. That's the best advice I can give. You know the prices and the cost and which ones you need to use to rotate in and out of your fungicide rotation programs. You can get these fungicides, again, in single active ingredients or these sort of co-formulated, many available for us today. Let's dial into this a little bit further. I get questions about ProStar versus Pedigree. Okay, on distribution channels and your reps, industry reps, I'm not sure if ProStar is left on the shelf or not. Still, ProStar 70 WG formulation, Pedigree is the SC liquid formulation. Again, it's food formulation. And on the old ProStar label, there was a preventative rate and a curative rate. On the Pedigree, there's also the preventative rate and the curative rate. And this, again, a reminder, when you're going to use any of these fungicides, double check and triple check the label for the exact language how to use these fungicides for a farrowing management program. Comparing the label rate for ProStar versus the label rate for Pedigree. There's different label rates, right? The ProStar is a WG, Pedigree is a SC, but the active is the same. Okay, so 3.25 fluid ounces preventative, 6.6 curative for the Pedigree. Okay, again, I get questions, well, the different rates. Yeah, they're different labeled rates because ProStar is a WG, Pedigree is a SC. But pay attention to the rates and you'll get the same amount of active ingredient. Again, this work was done, this was Dr. Bruce Martin, Clemson. There's other work showing that Pedigree SC works as good as ProStar. It's the same active ingredient, right? Flutalonil, excellent product for farrowing. Dr. Brian Anardi, a buddy of mine, he's a Penn State alum. I had to shout out to Brian for helping us out with great, outstanding young man. Ballista is a good product for farrowing as well, but the reason I want to show this also, pay attention to the labels. I like how many of these labels have this sort of tank mixing sequence. Pay attention to this. You don't want to put stuff in the spray tank and turn it into a big gel and big mess. This is especially true if you're going to tank mix fungicides and wetting agents together. Syngenta has a preventative farrowing program. If you have sites that have chronic farrowing problems, talk to your industry reps about going into a preventative program. Syngenta has a program. The time of application is based on soil temperature, the amount of post irrigation you need to water it in these products, that kind of thing. Syngenta has a program. There's more, I'm not going to go into this in detail, but the products are listed, the rates, that kind of thing. BASF has a program, very good. There's one for the north, one for the south. Okay, notice they're rotating different fungicides in. That's a very good program. Good idea to do that. Dr. John Cesar, a buddy there in Florida, had success with the BASF program. Bayer has, again, a program for cool season grass, warm season grass. Okay, so these companies have these programs. Take a look at these. You may have to stick with the program. The Bayer program is a 5-application program that's very effective at managing fairy ring. Again, if you're going to dive into these programs, please read the label, read the program language, and follow it to the T. Okay, so what's the best fungicide to control fairy ring? We have so many options available, right? Read and follow the label. Pay attention to the rates. And can you mix it with does the manufacturer recommend mixing with a wetting agent or not? Pay attention to the application intervals, the application timings, post-application irrigation. Okay, it's all part of managing fairy ring. Dr. Derek Settle pulled a core, and you notice the fairy ring fungi is sort of thriving underneath the surface. Pretty severe site here. Watering in, especially with a wetting agent, is very, very important. Okay. So preventative program. We've had some success over the years with a preventive program using many of those fungicides listed. Again, the preventive program worked better with cultural practices, with a wetting agent program. You could still get some, I've seen sites with still some fairy ring showing up at this. It's not as severe, it's more manageable. Oftentimes, though, we're dealing with what I call curative option or early curative. You see these fairy ring sites showing up, and that's when you got to really go at it aggressively. You want to punch holes, you want to use wetting agent combination to knock back the fungus and then try to help that turf recover. Again, these sites are pretty severe, and you're going to make a fungicide wetting agent application. It's not going to recover overnight. Agronomically, it's going to take a while. You're going to have to slice some seed into it. I've used this Vrado seeder on many occasions, thanks to the folks at Aquaid that allowed me to borrow their seeder on occasion to establish some sites. There's other seeders out there, of course, but you might have to resort to the seeding in some of these sites. Like I said, the previous picture shows I can get that. Shows those necrotic zone there. You might have to slice some seed in there to get it moving in the right direction. But again, the fungicide wetting agent first, render that to try to combat the hydrophobic nature of that root zone, and then get seed in there. That's your best bet. Be careful when you're seeding, of course. Dr. Sean Askew of Virginia Tech reminds us that PBIs and certain broadleaf herbicides, double check the seeding restrictions if you're thinking about slicing seed in, and you got your PGR herbicide programs as well. Make sure they don't have a bad interaction there. Physical removal. This is painful, but this might be a last resort. Pull some plugs, and you got fairy ring affected sites. Just pull some plugs, put some new root zone mix in there. This can be tedious, but if you have to do it, you have to do it. So bottom line is cultural practices. The drill there: surface venting, organic matter management, etc. Dial in your plant and soil health program. I think the wetting agent program is really your best minimizing the severity of fairy ring to keep the wet dry cycles sort of in check. You don't want the root zone too wet or too dry, and so a good wetting agent program hopefully will give you uniform hydration in the root zone over time. Fungicides, I like the fungicide tank mix with a wetting agent and watered in. If you have the capacity to punch holes, apply the wetting agent, water it in, then apply fungicide and water it in. Great. If you don't have time or the resources, tank mix them and water them in. But don't forget the post-application. I like to water it in right away. I know some folks will make an application in the morning, or let's say, or during the comes on at night. I mean, that's okay too, but I'd rather have it watered in right away. Okay. Anyway, your budget and your resources and your turfgrass expectations. Dial in your culture. Again, there are many fungicides available for fairy ring. See which ones work best for you. All these companies have invested a great deal of time, money, and effort and resources into putting fairy ring on their labels. All have good fairy ring products. Okay, see which ones work best for you. Don't forget Frisky Fairing Friday pictures when you can. And you folks working on golf courses, sometimes you have the best views of a workplace. Really enjoy seeing pictures like this versus dead turf. It's not too bad out there sometimes, correct? So anyway, coming up on the hour here, I don't want to take up too much of your time. Thank you for listening in today. And Lisa, I guess we have a few minutes. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Mike. Lots of great info, lots of great photos there. We appreciate your time. Thanks to everybody for joining us into PBI-Gordon. This webinar, you enter your own education points, and so you will want to go onto the GCSAA website, and you will want to enter the code 999-240-77-31841. Anyone who's listening to the recording, you need to also make sure that you put in the date that you listen rather than the original presentation date. So send in your questions, and don't forget to visit PBI-Gordon in San Diego. Their booth is 4136. They got a pretty good spot on the floor I saw when I looked today.
All right. Well, Lisa,
Mike is going to teach.
Yeah, I'm going to. Are they giving PBI? Are they giving out any swag at their booth? Any hats or any?
I don't know. That's an excellent question. They very well might.
Yeah. But Lisa, thank you for recommending we're doing a 4-hour webinar, a 4-hour in-person seminar. Looking forward to that on all about soil surfactants. We're going to dive into it. I've learned a lot about soil surfactants over the years just by working with Fairing. So thank you for mentioning that. This is a very good, all you want to know about soil surfactants and more. And I'll be teaching that with Dr. Cale Bigelow.
Excellent. You're also talking at another event on research, but it's not something they have to enroll for.
That's right. That was the research you can use on Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a question here. Is cannonball fungus related to fairy ring, and is it treated the same?
I think so. The cannonball fungus, the dreaded artillery fungus, it is a basidiomycete, a cousin of fairy ring. And I think you can treat it the same. It typically comes the thatch. And I know Dr. John Kaminsky had worked on it. I had worked on the artillery fungus as a landscape mulch. And I think you can go after it the same way. Needle tine, punch holes, solid tine. We don't have, there's no fungicide labeled for the artillery fungus. Again, I'm not, it's related to the basidiomycete, or it is a basidiomycete. So we can kind of assume or presume that the fairing fungi, the fairing fungicides can possibly work on the artillery fungus. We just don't have any data to support that. But I think we can tackle the artillery fungus the same way we go after fairing. Again, manage the organic matter using a soil surfactant to mitigate to manage the moisture status in the root zone. I haven't, again, real quick, I haven't seen the artillery fungus in turf. I mean, once in a while I'll see it. Mostly it's in a landscape mulch, colonizes landscape mulch pretty aggressively. But it can be in turf with sites that are really thatchy. So again, organic matter management key there as well. But very, very good. Yeah, the dreaded artillery fungus. Yeah, that's a unique one.
Now, you have mentioned several times, and so I didn't feel like I had to, but now I will say the label is the law, and you have to go by that wherever you are. Make sure that you do look at those labels and use them. And as you said earlier, watering in can be critical with some of those things too, so that they work well for you.
Yes. Yeah.
Our friend Gwen Stakey says, excellent presentation, Mike.
Oh, great.
Have
Dr.
you
Glenn,
ever seen or heard of any notable results utilizing the self-antagonistic nature of some fairy ring fungi,
oh,
spinning or transplanting plugs, etc.?
yeah, I get that on occasion, where if you take a fairing site and let's say you dig up a section of the fairing of the necrotic zone, the necrotic ring, and you flip it around and have the fairing grow into itself. I've actually done that and what I found is the fairing fungus, it doesn't antagonize itself, it just grows outward. And you know, I haven't had luck with the best thing to do is if you're going to physically remove an affected site, remove the sod, dig up the soil, either mix in the soil, till up the soil, or remove the soil and replace it. I get that
Sounds like a good idea,
yeah,
but it
yes, it
sounds
sounds like
like the fairy ring is smarter. It doesn't fall for
I
that.
know, been around a
Is it
long
more
time.
effective to treat individual rings or to treat the entire green?
That's a good question. I get that a lot too. This is it's so hard. I've been on sites where there's one or two rings on a green, and you could say, okay, just spot treat those individual rings, and that's a great idea. But then you go ahead and spot treat the individual rings, and then a week later, several rings show up on the other side of the green. And so, it's almost like if you see one or two rings on a green, you better treat the whole entire green, because chances are that the fairing fungi is colonizing the whole green. But again, you want to save time and money, so you could treat those individual rings at first, and then keep an eye on things. If you see the other rings showing up, then go after it. But again, while you're spraying,
Overall, do the whole green, yeah, because
yeah,
it's going to
I
save you
think
time
so.
and money in the long run, right?
I
It's
think I think
not that
exactly
big of
right. It
an
will save
area.
you time and money. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, someone has asked me to repeat the code that you will need on the website for your
All
education
right.
points. It is on the slide there, but that code is 999-24077-31841. Now, as you exit, there will be an evaluation survey, and we would love to hear your comments, your thoughts. So as you exit, if you'll fill that out for us. And seeing no other questions, Mike. Oh, wait a minute. Here we go. We've noted some fairy rings grow at a faster rate year to year over others. What is this due to? Is it a different cultivar or what?
No, I would say that's one thing about fairing doesn't pay attention to species or cultivars, warm season, cool season grass cultivars. I think it's due to could be the fairing species itself. It could be the roots. A sandier root zone, you tend to grow faster, more aggressively. But again, it could be related to the species. We tend to see the puffball types, the fairing that produce puffballs. We tend to see them on our sand-based greens more than the traditional toadstool types. But that's just observation. So to your question specifically, I think it's just fairing species specific.
Okay.
Lisa,
Several
thank you
thank yous.
for
We
organizing
appreciate
this.
your time today, Mike.
Thank you.
Thanks again to PBI-Gordon and everybody for joining us. And we'll see you in San Diego. Stay well, everybody.
San Diego, looking forward to the sunshine. See you now.
That's for sure, huh? Instead of a little bit of
Right.
cold snow.
You
Oh,
got it.
man. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.